to welcome everyone to this webinar that it focuses on veteran groups, and particularly the Interfaith Veterans Workgroup in Delaware and Wilmington, Delaware. I am Nancy Ramsey, the director of the Soul Repair Center located at Bright Divinity School in Fort Worth, Texas. I want to welcome you to our webinar series that is co-sponsored by the Volunteers of America Shea Moral Injury Center, directed by Rita Nakashima Brock, a senior vice president for the VOA. The Soul Repair Center seeks to provide resources for religious leaders, VA and military chaplains, and civilian professional caregivers who support veterans affected by moral injury and their families. This series provides information in areas that are often under-researched or for which information is not easily available. Today's webinar provides an opportunity for us to learn from the Interfaith Veterans Workgroup in Wilmington, Delaware, that was founded and now directed by Tom Davis, a member of the National Advisory Board of the Soul Repair Center. We're featuring this veterans group as a way of inviting your interest in and resources for forming or supporting groups of veterans in your area in which they might find ongoing support. Today's webinar will proceed first with an introduction to the group by its founder and director, Tom Davis. He'll provide a brief introduction to IVW and then introduce each member of the panel, who will then speak in turn. After each of them has spoken, we'll have some opportunity for conversation among these presenters, and then we'll move to focus on your questions for them at around 3 p.m. Eastern. The chat is provided for you to post questions for the presenters. Please send your questions for the panelists to the chat, and I'll be sharing those questions with the presenters when we move to that portion of the program. I want to remind you that approximately 10 days from this program, a link for this webinar will be posted at the Soul Repair website and remain there for your reference and use. Before we begin, I want to thank Dr. Rita Nakashima Brock for moderating the chat during this program, and also want to thank Sam McAllister, a member of the VOA staff who's producing this webinar. And now I turn the program over to Tom Davis, who will introduce our program.
Thank you very much, Nancy, and also thank you, Rita, in the background for giving us this opportunity. I am the founder of the Interfaith Veterans Workgroup. I'm a native Delawarean and a Presbyterian pastor, honorably retired now. In 1976, I was ordained for campus ministry and spent some time in campus ministry and then in Miami and lots of different things, small church pastoring and some seminary teaching and counseling. In 1970, I served as a naval advisor to Coastal Group 34
These are folks with multiple
in the Mekong Delta, in the middle of the Mekong Delta. That was a South Vietnamese coastal group. There were 4 Americans, including myself, and we were there to give military advice. Our mission was to prevent the transporting of men and supplies by the enemy on the waterways. We used wooden junks, 30 feet long, and 2 fiberglass runabouts for that work. It was fairly dangerous, although not as dangerous as further north in the country. I was in some firefights. I was fortunately not wounded physically, but I did experience some moral injury. On one occasion that had to do with setting an ambush, which felt more like murder than the fair exchange of a firefight. And late in my tour, I'm ashamed to say that I deliberately fired on a fleeing civilian. If you want the details on that, you can ask in the Q&A. And then finally, after the war was over, in 1975, when Saigon fell, I experienced great guilt for abandoning my counterpart, my Vietnamese counterpart. So I knew moral injury existentially. Later on, I learned about it academically. I had a dramatic spiritual experience in Vietnam, and as a result, I decided that if I survived, I would become a pastor. And I did survive and became a pastor. And becoming a pastor was very helpful for me in returning and also in healing from post-traumatic stress and moral injury later. In 2015, I was worshiping with Quakers. I think of myself these days as a Quakertarian. I spend about half my time with Quakers and half with Presbyterians. And in 2015, I was with the Quakers and reading their monthly magazine, which that month was dedicated to veteran suicide. I learned that 22 veterans each day were killing themselves. I was appalled, and I asked my Quaker friends, would they join me in seeing what we could do about this in our small state of Delaware? About 6 of them did. And one other person who was very instrumental in that early group of organizers is now passed away. He died early in the COVID epidemic of COVID. And he was a Muslim, formerly a Baptist, African-American. His name was Umar Hassan El. I honor him today and I miss him dearly. But Umar and the Quakers and a few other Vietnam vets formed the nucleus of the organizing crew. We decided upon the name Interfaith Veterans Workgroup. Why was interfaith important? Well, one thing is that the wars these days are interreligious disharmony. Secondly, that the services themselves, the armed services, are interfaith. And finally, being interfaith gives us resources for healing that we wouldn't have otherwise. We are not just a veterans group. Our members include civilians as well as veterans, roughly half and half. And finally, we're a work group, not just corporate projects. Actually, we've only done one of those, but we support each other in the individual ministries that we have a passion for. You'll hear about those later. So that pretty much exhausts my 5 minutes, and I'm going to turn it over now. That's my warning. I'm going to turn it over now to Chaplain Shellarine Lang, who is connected to the Veteran Hospice Visit Program. Shellarine.
Unfortunately, Shellarine has been called over to the hospice center and hopes to be back as soon as possible. So I believe we'll move on to Sydney Jacobs.
Okay. Sydney is in the writers group.
Hi, hello. Yes, my name is Sydney Jacobs, and I'm a veteran sociologist, poet, and former college professor. My areas of interest and expertise include race, class, gender, reentry, and deviance. And I like to use my poetry to deliver my sociology, and also, of course, to be in close contact with my Lord and Savior. Mission: I shall write, recite, speak, and teach in the name of my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. From the Sid Jacobs Ladder to Success, I will inspire the uninspired, the oppressed and the depressed, and those trying to swim their best in the stream of life. So help me God. One aim, one goal, one's rendezvous with destiny. Father, Jesus, family, friends, believers, and especially non-believers. Yes, we can do this. I started out writing poetry in Minot, North Dakota in the Air Force, and I was writing very depressing poetry. The first one I wrote was called Anxiety, and it made me almost want to commit suicide. And I figured that if, a voice came to me and said, if you keep writing this kind of poetry, you will not survive Minot, North Dakota. And if you don't commit suicide, somebody else will. So then I went to writing positive poetry, and of course, God-centered poetry. It gives me it puts me in contact with my Lord and Savior, God. It gives me a sense of cleansing. It's a way for me to talk to God and for God to talk back to me, particularly through an audience. The reason why I joined this group is because of Tom. He asked me to come to the group, and I did. And I found out that you have some very talented people in this group. And it gives me a sense of belonging. And I will say that if you were in this group, you would be home now. And that is about it. And now I'd like to introduce Jack Sanders. He's the leader of our hiking group.
I don't know what happened to Jack. This is Tom speaking. I don't think he's come aboard yet. We could turn instead to Jessica. And Jessica Lewis is our Tai Chi for Veterans instructor. She is a civilian, but I'll let her explain how she got connected with our group. Go ahead, Jessica.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you. I'm so grateful to be here today along with some of my superheroes of compassionate lived experience. I always say that if I end up being any one of these folks when I grow up, I'm going to be really happy. But instead, I am just a mere mortal, and I happen to know a great deal about health and well-being. And one facet of my work in particular is what I bring to the table here. I'm an authorized instructor for the federal program, which was created by the VA Community Care Network called Tai Chi for Veterans. And I very quickly want to show you what's over my shoulder here. Let me switch cameras as fast as I can. If you can see, like right over here, this is actually the first national monument in the country dedicated to all service personnel from all branches who have lost their lives just since 9/11. And on beautiful sunny Wednesdays like today, we're outside, and we also have people zooming in. And I have classes throughout the week that have both live and virtual attendance options. But this is an especially beautiful and pertinent spot to be. I'm really glad I could share that. But back to my faith journey. I spent the first 40-ish years of my life as a very faithful Episcopalian. But for the last 20-something years, actually, ever since my father's suicide, which literally caught everyone who knew Dad completely by surprise, if you had to place a label on me, I suppose I'd describe myself as an extremely open-minded Christian who's become very, very curious about the intersection between organized religions and ancient spiritual practices. And spiritual really is the operant word here, because collectively the IVW brings so many practices to the table that may not be traditional or dogmatic in any way, but are deeply, deeply spiritual. And the reason why that's relevant is because we're currently witnessing a global phenomenon in which millions of people are simply drifting away from all organized religions and never looking back. But one of the foundations of human behavior is that we all crave relationship and transcendence. Basically, we all just want to feel and be part of something bigger than ourselves, right? So one of the most beautiful aspects of what we're up to here is that IVW has literally something for everyone, veteran or not. Plus, a number of our activities obviously involve being outside, which also has deeply enlivening effects on mental and physical health. And of course, Tom mentioned I'm not a veteran. I have a lot of experience with veterans. It's been my experience, actually, that in general, I hope I'm not about to get in trouble here, veterans tend to think that only other veterans can really understand and connect with them. So ostensibly, you'd think the likelihood that I'd feel deep, abiding connections to my students and vice versa, simply by doing Tai Chi with them, is very, very slim. But that has not been my experience with these classes. The real magic of Tai Chi is that it puts the practitioner in touch with that little spot of the divine residing in all of us. It's always down there, but sometimes we overlook it or even forget it's there altogether. But that's where we all feel connected to one another. And even more importantly, nothing is wrong because everything's happening right in the moment. And then, whoops, that moment's gone. And this really isn't magic anyway. The body of research on the connections between practicing Tai Chi and improvements in all aspects of human health is huge and absolutely rock solid. And that's precisely where the intersection for me occurs between being involved with IVW and teaching Tai Chi. They've both literally blown open my ability to step into someone else's shoes, or at least notice when I'm feeling very judgy. I actually met Tom a little over 2 years ago while we were sitting next to each other getting haircuts. I mean, look at him, he has the most amazing hair, right? And he immediately struck me as such a lovely human being. I said to myself, I'll participate in anything that he's running. But after I got to know him a little better, I realized he and my first husband, Jack, served in Vietnam at about the same time. And I often tell folks that my first husband died of a combination of PTS and Agent Orange poisoning, which is certainly the case. But what I don't always mention was that although I was Jack's primary caregiver till the day he died, we had already been divorced for several years by then. At some point, his behavior became so erratic and kind of scary that it began to feel dangerous for him and I and our daughter to continue living together. But just in the last 2 years, I've really begun to frame my thinking around Jack and even my dad in a really different light. In the past, I really held on to feelings of having been personally attacked and carry scars to prove it. But these days, it's much easier for me to see that they must have both been fighting very hard battles, and in Dad's case, a completely silent one. So I certainly shouldn't continue to take all this so personally. And I really don't think it's a coincidence that I met Tom and joined IVW about the same time that shift in my perception began to occur. I actually have to leave in a few moments because my students are going to arrive any moment, but I'm going to put some information about how to reach out to me in the chat if anybody has any questions at all. And I'm going to turn it over to Shannon, who is our amazing mindfulness instructor.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. And Jessica and I had the privilege of actually working together because I now work at the Elkton Vet Center with veterans, and she's been able to do Tai Chi classes with us while we've been doing mindfulness. But so I'm Shannon Ayers, and I'm a 20-year veteran, Air Force veteran. But I like to tell people I've been in the military my whole life because my dad was Navy for 20 years, and pretty much every ancestor I can think of was in the military. So it's just been a generational employment opportunity, we'll just put it that way. So I first enlisted in the Air Force and became a radar technician, and later transitioned over to becoming a medic. And then later on, after I finished my bachelor's degree, became a C-130 pilot with the Delaware Air National Guard. So deployed multiple times to numerous theaters and combat zones, and got to really see a lot of the world through flying, which has been such a, I guess, a lot of things in life, like a blessing and a curse. I got to see, some of the most beautiful sunsets and some of the ravages of war at the same time. So I became involved with this group because I was pursuing a doctorate degree in pastoral counseling, and I was looking up research for moral injury, and I came across Tom Davis, who out of everyone in the United States, Tom Davis came up first, and he lives probably about a mile from my house. So very coincidental. And I got to meet with him and then learn all about this incredible group, incredible organization that he's been running and putting together, and all the other members that are putting in so much of their heart and soul into it. I got involved with the moral injury and even becoming a counselor, because when I was a pilot in Afghanistan, on my first deployment in Afghanistan, I had to stay behind. I got voluntold to stay behind, and everybody else went home. And I later found out that one of my friends that I had known before he even became in the Air Force, when he got home, he completed suicide. And it really shook me up, really woke me up, I should say, to really like fundamental things of what's going on, what's real, what's not real. What are ways that I'm connected, and what are ways, the many, many ways that I'm disconnected? Now, I grew up Christian, just sort of non-denominational. My dad was did a little study in like Eastern religions and stuff in high school, but nothing really like organized by any certain imagination. But with the suffering of multiple deployments, the suicide, and just feeling I think my own symptoms of PTSD, I needed a way to really, and I couldn't even articulate this at the time, but I needed really a way to come back home to myself. You know, it wasn't geographical. This was a way to really come back home to me, connect with myself, others, and especially God. So someone introduced me to mindfulness, which was great because I think I had so many hangups with organized religion and God and things like that. Mindfulness was just a way to really become more familiar with the part of myself that's not that's bigger than any kind of one event, and that it doesn't have the power to name, you know, who I am. So through mindfulness, I was able to really connect with the things that are deeper within myself and connect with others from a deeper place. And as it came about and circle around, I guess the way things do, is that I ended up going back to my roots of Christianity, this time as a Roman Catholic. So I've been able to go back to the religion that I started out from, but in a different and more deeper and meaningful way. I know the Interfaith Veterans Workgroup, it would take me like hours to go into like the incredible work we're doing and how meaningful it was. But I think three things I really want to get across in the short time I have is, one, it provides a sense of purpose. And I think as veterans, when you're part of real big purpose-filled, you know, events and deployments and situations, it gives you this feeling that you're part of something bigger than just yourself. Leaving the Air Force, I lost that, and it took me a while. It was almost like an identity struggle to figure out, like, who am I and what is my purpose? So this kind of fills that. It definitely fills that. It gives me that purpose. Other things is that it's so very diverse on so many different levels, and I love all the different aspects of racial, cultural, religious, generational inputs. You know, there's so many different perspectives, and so many oftentimes I think, especially with trauma, like we get like so caught up with just one perspective and kind of have a hard time seeing the forest through the trees. Being able to be in a multi-diverse group, you know, for example, like with Tom Davis and just talking with him, you know, having a Vietnam veteran like share and be so open and vulnerable about his struggles, and it really gave me hope that the things that I was going through, the struggles I'm going through as a younger veteran, that there's hope, there's, you know, life on the other side of all of it, and it provides a sense of stability too. So those are some of the big things that I guess I wanted to get across. And so now I do mindfulness. It's sort of my big program with veterans, both at the Elkton Vet Center and with the group. But I think having a group to come home to is I just don't know anything else more healing than that. So the mindfulness is a tool, but really it's the group that's the healing part. Oh, and next is Tom. Going back to Tom, right?
Right. Thank you very much, Shannon. So we had expected Jack Sanders to come aboard, but I got a message from him in the chat that he is having both audio and visual difficulties this morning or this afternoon. So I suggested that he input via the chat, and I will spend just a little while explaining what he does with us and for us. Jack is a member of the Cherokee tribe, and in his youth, he spent a good deal of time outdoors and hiking, and he's a wonderful tennis player. And though he is older than this old man, Jack really gets up over the hills, and he's a wonderful hike leader. It's good to be outdoors. Being amongst green things is a wonderful way to heal. So Jack leads hikes every week, and sometimes more than one hike each week. And I hope that he'll be able to solve the tech problems and get aboard with us for the Q&A because he's not only into hiking, but Jack is very much into Muslim Christian relations. Some local Muslims say that Jack attends more Friday Juma worship services than they do. And he's also very active with the Sikh community. And furthermore, Jack is active in prison ministry. So he's a real activist. And I'm sorry he can't be with us just now. And I might also say a little bit about our hospice ministry because our chaplain has been called to active duty in hospice even during this conference. So some time ago, I was approached by the volunteer recruiter for the Beata Healthcare Hospice Program. And he said, we want to start a program that will enable veterans in hospice to be visited by other veterans. The nurses that attend the hospice patients are very good and well trained in that duty, but it's something special for a veteran to visit another veteran. And so I volunteered, and Juan George, another of our members, volunteered, and we have been serving Beata Hospice in various ways. Juan, during the COVID pandemic, has been calling patients daily to check with their families about their conditions. And then he relays that information to the nursing staff at Beata, which saves them an enormous amount of time, which they've been hard pressed for during the pandemic. Also, I occasionally am called up by the staff to participate and actually to lead a pinning ceremony. We visit a veteran in hospice care at his home or her home, and we award a pin honoring them for their service. We also give them a marvelously decorated blanket adorned with the logo of their branch of service. So the hospice program has been something that I was surprised about. I thought it was going to be a sad kind of duty, and it's not at all. It actually makes you feel very good inside. So we're happy to have that opportunity. Let me see. I should mention power breath. We have 3 kinds of meditation practiced by our members. You just heard from Shannon regarding mindfulness meditation, which is largely influenced by Buddhist practice. We have another seated heavy breathing meditation, which is called power breath by the Welcome Home Troops program. They trained me for free. And this is based on Hindu practice. And it involves nothing but some slow and deep breathing exercises. But the effect on both the body and the mind of that daily practice is quite astounding. I have benefited from a lower blood pressure. And I noticed that when I'm in heavy traffic, I don't get mad anymore. I'm Mr. Iceman in heavy traffic. So that's the second. And of course, Jessica is the leader of a third kind of meditation, which is movement meditation. So it's good that we have these choices because different strokes for different folks. Not everybody would be content with just one kind. Then in addition to these programs, which we practice somewhat corporately, there are ones among us that volunteer for activities in the community as individuals. For instance, we have a Navy corpsman who saw some very dangerous duty in I Corps in Vietnam, and he has been a longtime volunteer for Habitat for Humanity. Jack, I mentioned Jack Sanders has been very active in prison ministry. He goes into local prisons and teaches the men, mostly men there, about how to give good interviews, business interviews, and habits that lead to success once they get out. An opportunity that just opened up recently is refugee resettlement. Of course, that's been going on for a while, but now that veterans may be troubled by the very quick departure from Afghanistan, I expect some moral injury will come from that. but we have an opportunity to devote ourselves to resettling some Afghan families. And we've already accepted a couple of those. The Jewish Family Services in Wilmington is the agency authorized by the state of Delaware to supervise the communities of faith who are participating in that volunteer work. So these are just some examples. And when we first started out, we thought we would primarily be about work projects as a group. As I mentioned in the introduction, we did do one such project. But afterwards, we have ended up supporting each other in our individual passions. We believe that the Spirit gives us unique passions and skills and aptitudes, and we support each other in exercising those. So that pretty much, I'm so sorry that a couple of our members that were signed up today couldn't make it for a couple of different reasons, but I guess yes.
Jack is available.
Oh, excellent. Okay. Jack, welcome.
Thank you.
I just said a little bit about the hiking program, and I mentioned that you're connected with prison ministry and also with Muslims and Sikhs. I may have stolen all your thunder, but I'll bet not.
No, I think that it's very important for us to be able to help as many people as we can, whenever we can, because I think we all believe in the importance of giving to other people. I learned this as a veteran serving overseas, and I think that I feel very, very privileged to have been given some gifts which have allowed me to use those gifts to help train and motivate and guide offenders while in prison to be able to learn about the important things in life using the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People as a textbook. And they have used those books, and they've also been able to get their families to get a copy of the book. So every week they discuss with their family members what they are learning. The family members also capitalize on that learning process. The bottom line is that we are helping the inmates who are helping their families better prepare for them coming out as new people and much better conscientious individuals than when they went into the prison. And I think that anytime we can do anything to assist someone else that's been struggling, we are actually serving our belief system. And last, I will say that I also work with JFS. I get them food. I've gotten inmates, I've gotten refugees, for instance, from Afghanistan. I get them each a coupon for $250 for food through ShopRite. Chris Kenny's a good friend of mine, the CEO. He also supports my prison ministry. And also, I know there were some veterans who were upset when we were bringing in these Afghanis, until I pointed out that a couple of Afghanis that I worked with happened to have been interpreters for the Marines and the Air Force in Afghanistan. And the only reason they came here was the Taliban had learned exactly where they were located and was telling them that they were going to get them and kill both them and their families. So I think it's important for us to know that these refugees coming in, there may be many of them who actually were serving us and our country by virtue of the work they were doing during our presence in Afghanistan. And we ought to be aware that this is something that we might not be aware of, but should. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity. I'm still getting the Afghani refugees help with food, additional food, and I've gotten one a car. Again, it's all part of, I think, the belief system that we will share in helping each other. And that's a very important component. And I thank you for the opportunity to share this with you today.
Thank you, Jack. Nancy, I think we've said our speeches and we're open to questions.
I think you're right. And I'm going to, yes, I think we could get back to a gallery view, Sam, if you could pull that off. Thank you very much. I'm wondering if, Jack, if before we move into the group, if you might say some more about your intentions and your experience of the way the hiking groups seem to be beneficial to the folks that you take with you and to yourself.
Sure. I have learned that the people who go hiking turn around and say that they didn't realize how helpful and beneficial it is for them, the opportunity for camaraderie, especially with the reduction, if not elimination, of the numerous electronic interference issues we deal with every day, as well as other people with less than critical information to pass along. So I find that this is part of my heritage. I was raised Cherokee. I hunted with a bow and arrow. I trapped animals and skinned them and sold the pelts and gave the carcasses away to needy people who wanted something to eat. And so for me, I find the opportunity to go out into nature, the blessing that we in this tri-state area have in abundance with the various. I just took some people hiking the other day to Winterthur up on 52. And I think that the more that we get involved with Mother Nature, my Cherokee belief system has taught me to not only appreciate, but to grow spiritually. I find it's a fantastic opportunity to pray. It also helps keep us in very good shape. As I think Reverend Davis knows, I can move along at a pretty good clip sometime for several hours. And that's been a tremendous help to me as I age along with the rest of the world. And I think I'll probably live a little bit longer because of it. I know it helped me through my cancer. I was hiking while I was getting my radiation cancer treatments for 2 months. And that, I think, helped my recovery process. Hopefully that's helpful to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see that Jessica added, we're connected to each other, including the earth. And I'm thinking that also, for those of you that identify as dealing with moral injury, that sense of connection even beyond each other, I'm wondering if that's something that you can affirm that's been helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that we do get a chance to get to know each other better. And I find that we talk about things that might not normally be shared, understanding the reality that men are not especially inclined to get into personal discussions about themselves. So I think that when men are out hiking, women have always been blessed with the ability to share with one another how they're doing, and very healthy, positive, constructive conversations occur. This is helping men become more conversant with one another and getting to know each other and grow both spiritually and socially as they go and hike on these trails.
Nancy, I just got back yesterday from a 2-day pastor's relief retreat. And it was all about the importance of play and how play heals. And certainly hiking is one form of play, although sometimes I wonder in Jack's pace whether he's being too competitive. But at any rate, I find also as a photographer, when I'm out, I want to stop and take a picture now and then, or run a video clip, and then later spend some time posting it and reflecting on it. So there are lots of things that are important about hiking.
Mm-hmm. I also, Jack, want to affirm your point about the ways that this society at least engenders boys to become men, that side-by-side conversation seems to be easier, including more open sharing than face-to-face. So I think that's a really good insight about facilitating connection. And I thank you for sharing that. You know, Sydney, I wonder if we could talk a little more, if I could ask you to elaborate some more on writing, because we know that a number of veteran groups, a number of veterans have found writing and sharing their writing to really be an important part of their journey in healing. And I wonder if you could say more about that, where you sometimes read your writing, and maybe there's some others that you've come to know through this process. But if you could speak more about the writing groups, I'm hoping that the that this center can have a focus later in the spring on writing groups themselves. But I really appreciate if you could share more about not more about what it's meant to you, but what your sense is from knowing others for whom this is helpful.
Well, I've actually, when I was at Widener University teaching there, I taught there, started adjunct maybe 1998 or something like that. I went full-time 2006 to like maybe 2013. And we also went to the prisons. And I would take, say, 17 students from Widener to match up with 17 inside students in a big forum. And we would share our writing, poetry, and so on and so forth. Writing for me is, as a college professor, for an example, it's easier for me to get the point across, to get people motivated to kind of like listen to me. And I can get more done probably in a poem, particularly a long one, than I can in a chapter. So I would use, writing as the vehicle. And again, it's been a cathartic experience for me. For an example, let me just give an example. This is a piece here. This is a short piece. It's not long. It's not even the whole thing, of course. But this is called Where's the Unum, as in E Pluribus Unum. I'm going to skip just a few lines. That's all. It's talking about our soldiers. Our soldiers come back in body bags. A solemn return to Dover. A coffin draped with the American flag. God, I wish the war was over. Go hug a soldier on Veterans Day and thank him or her for his or her service. And when you take that need to protest police brutality or Donald Trump or even Forrest Gump, don't be nervous. Do know what you're kneeling for. More, know what you're dying or living for. Best know who died and who are dying in service for you to kneel in protest of police brutality, Donald Trump, or even Forrest Gump. Does such an act of altruism not deserve innovation characteristic of a great nation? I remember John Cougar Mellencamp's wonderful refrain in my bipolar brain, ain't that America for you and me? Where is the unum? It's on the one. It's in you, it's in me, our love, one job, one America, in the ones who are struggling to be free. It's in the one who sings my country 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, so eloquently spoken by Dr. King in his I Have a Dream speech. But when your hand touches your heart, remember we all played a part to help that banner wave. My thing is that with my work, the center of my work really is love, is agape love, is God. And so as a race theorist or a critical race theorist, that's in the news these days a lot, to the left, to the right, but basically I'm centered around God. And so when I go out and share my work with people, I'm trying to also, through Christ, through God, not proselytize, but just trying to share with people. And so that's what my work does. And I've had people, of course, tell me that it works. So that's my mission in life.
Can I compliment that with
When it comes to writing, I write, I recite every morning in the bathroom, wherever, out by the tree line, whoever will listen. Okay, so that's about it.
Jack, you were saying something.
Yeah, I wanted to compliment the professor for this wonderful thing he's doing, because I would bring in Al Mills, one of the twin poet laureates of Delaware, to the inmates, and he would have them writing poetry, and the inmates were thrilled at that particular experience, and they all were writing a lot of poetry, which again, as the professor knows, is a wonderful, uplifting and healing experience. Plus, I always had multiple speakers, as Reverend Davis knows, to come in and speak to my classes of very significant prominence, federal judges and Superior Court judges and law enforcement. And what was beautiful was I would have them write thank you letters to each of the speakers after they had spoken. And I think that giving these inmates the opportunity to express in writing their appreciation, that what they got out of it, and their gratitude for those experiences also was helping them come to a better understanding of relationships in general and the value of expressing thankfulness.
Yes. And I also wrote a piece with Albert, actually, called, I think it's with the twin poets, called what's it called? Why Can't You See It? Something like that. It's called Why Can't We See in this land of misery, whatever.
Yeah.
But it deals with race and so on and so forth. But that's a piece that we wrote together. And when I was director of the Delaware Humanities Forum, the outreach part of it, we would have the twin poets go out to the different places that you're talking about, and we would get all these wonderful letters of how they're transforming their lives, and so on and so forth. Yes, so it works.
I might add a note about Al Mills, one of the poets laureate. By the way, those two brothers are social workers, African Americans, serving in mostly West Center City, Wilmington. And Al joined IVW after I met him for coffee and discovered that he was suffering very badly from moral injury from an incident that he experienced as part of a armor division in Iraq. And he was having anger problems and didn't know how to shake it. And I encouraged him with both prayer and also encouraged him to do some breathing, mindfulness meditation. And it seemed to help. And but for him, the main thing that helped was writing. And eventually he wrote about that incident that troubled him so. And that was very cathartic for him, the writing of it. So I'm sorry he couldn't make it today. By the way, the reason he couldn't make it is that he's starting a brand new job today that will involve him in prison ministry. So more of the same.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering before I have some questions from the group, but I wanted to see if any of you have questions for the other or prompts you want to offer to another of things that you wish they'd added or that they've prompted you to think about from what they presented.
I would like to ask.
Go ahead.
Well, it looks like everybody. I'm going to start with Jessica. Jessica, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't really have a prompt, but I just wanted to remark on something or play off of something that Tom just said. I'd already put this little comment in the chat. There's actually an ancient Chinese saying that we get really good at what we practice most. But it's been my experience that we only practice the thing we like. And that really is the beauty of what we're all here for, is that we have so many different offerings that literally anyone can find something that really speaks to them. Some people, if you tell them to sit down and practice mindfulness, it's as if you're giving the monkey up there permission to run amok. Forget that. No, I'd much rather stand up and walk. I'd rather hike with Jack. I'd rather sing. I'd rather write poetry. I'd rather do Tai Chi, Or some people would never want to do Tai Chi. That's the last thing they want to do. But that's all I wanted to point out.
How about others of you?
I was going to ask, I'd love to speak to the professor after the session's over because of my prison ministry and his prison ministry, because I think there could be some beneficial information provided to each other.
Yes, I would love to. I would love to talk with you about that. Yes.
I'm interested. It sounds like at least several of the members of the group are involved in prison ministry.
Yes, that's right.
Is there something particular about that ministry that's drawn you to it?
Oh, well, the great need, which Jack has spoken about, but also I sat with a group of returning citizens from a local prison, and I didn't say anything for the longest time. I just was there to learn and to be present. And what I saw pretty soon was that many of the challenges that returning veterans face are similar to the challenges that returning prisoners face. And in fact, I'm helping to organize a conference in March that has to do with families reuniting after an absence caused by either call of duty or perhaps imprisonment. Mm-hmm. And I think it will be interesting if those two groups are wanting to be together on that subject. It'll be interesting to compare and contrast their experiences and their solutions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Sydney, you had a point there you wanted to say.
Yes, I would just like to add that quitting college because I had one foot in the institution of college and I had the other foot out on the street. My grades were always good, but I always got into kind of like deviant type things. And so it kind of saved my life to go to the military and then come back. All right. A lot of my friends became teachers and my brother's an attorney, the whole bit. We did some crazy things together too. And when I go into the prison, okay, I see myself as an endangered species as a black man. So when I go to prison and I'm looking at these students, okay, they're a reflection of me. I see myself. Okay, so I know that I like to think that we did a pretty good job when I was at Widening University going to the Chester prison, you know, but even with the mindfulness, we kind of taught it on the academic level. I didn't really learn much about it until I went to the VA. And just listening to Shannon talk, I realized, wow, man, she really knows her stuff. No knock on my former colleagues or anything, but we knew theory. Put it that way. I'll leave it like that. Okay. So.
One of the things that I've learned from some friends who are deeply involved in a ministry with prisoners was as I talked to them about moral injury, it became clear to us that they're working with populations that experience moral injury.
Of course.
And so but we haven't articulated that exactly thus far in our conversation. So I wonder if that's one of the commonalities that might be helping to forge the relationships that you're experiencing.
It is a commonality. And I learned from returning citizens that one way to heal from moral injury is to focus on the future rather than the past. You can't, they would say, I did stupid things and I'm sorry for them, but I'm not going to dwell on them because that gets me nowhere. I'm going to look at what I can do tomorrow and how I lead myself today.
Right. I'm going to begin I have a question that I want to offer to you all before we shift to focusing entirely on those questions. And I'm seeing, do I remember, Tom, that Shannon is is away, that she's, I see her tile.
No, she's here.
Shannon, I'm hoping that you can join this gallery view. And if there are things that you want to add before we shift to more responding to some questions, as the others were able to add.
Yeah, I don't really know what else to add at this point.
Okay.
But thank you.
Sure.
I'd like to ask Shannon, because I haven't visited her at her counseling office. Ask her about what it's like to be a veteran counselor now at that special facility. Who do you see as contradistinct to a VA counselor, for instance?
Tom, can you break that down into smaller words for me?
Oh,
who do I see that's different than like a counselor?
I mean, what kinds of counselees come to you as perhaps contrasted to ones that might go to another counselor? Obviously, it's a veteran, but what kind of veteran?
Right. So the VA is like a big umbrella, and then they have the medical centers. At a vet center, it's just outpatient. It's just therapy, and so we see the criteria is that they have to either be like a combat veteran or have been sexually assaulted, been involved with mourning, that kind of thing. Basically, trauma. So I work with trauma all day long. And it can be really intense, if I'm being really honest, as far as like bringing up my own trauma, my own military stuff. So going back to like the blessing curse thing, like it's easy for me to feel very connected to the veterans that I work with. And it's a population that, like I said before, it's almost like treating my own family, you know, that people come from different eras, people come from different branches of service, but it's sort of like a dysfunctional family, you know, where we all know the rules. We all kind of grew up in the same kind of family thing, and we can make fun of each other, you know, but we like, at the end of the day, we're very bonded and very close. But yeah, I see a lot of, I guess recently the trauma of Afghanistan and people feeling the effects of leaving. Not only it's not just the interpreters, it's also their families. So even seeing like the interpreters and their small children literally being in danger for their lives from torturous death,
Yeah.
and then understanding that these people put their lives on the line for us when we needed it, and we made these promises. You make these promises, and they help us out. So I think that brought up a lot of anxiety, a lot of questioning, a lot of deep-rooted spiritual questions, and then also just purpose questions of like, what did it all mean? What was it all for? Who am I if I am part of this big machine that we just leave people behind, things like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, for the most part, it's trauma people that come here.
Thank you. By the way, Nancy, it occurred to me that what we've been doing in the last 10 minutes with this gallery is what we do during IVW meetings, especially during the pandemic.
Right.
If we have no other business, merely checking in with each other and finding out what each of us is doing in our various pursuits is very supportive and consoling.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to pose a question that has come from a chaplain in that app in the chat section. Sorry, that's related to the pinning ceremony, Tom, that you mentioned with veterans at the end of life.
Yes.
And I wonder, and others of you may have been involved in this. So I'm starting with Tom because he mentioned it, but you're also welcome to join in. And the question has to do with how you discern. I believe that you all, whoever is Tom or you or other members of IVW, will have had a longer experience with this person than these final moments. But how do you discern that this pinning will be appreciated, will be helpful to the person at this point in their life?
That's a very good question. I determine it through the staff person who arranges it, who has already checked that out with both the veteran and the family members to make sure that it's something that is invited and not rejected.
Right.
I might also say that I have had only one opportunity, this was pre-COVID, to spend a long time, but that was like maybe a couple of months of weekly visits to a veteran who was in hospice. And that was a wonderful experience. He was a Wilmingtonian, so he told me a lot about my hometown that I didn't know before. He was in his 90s, had served in the Navy, my service, as a diver, a hard hat diver, not a scuba diver. So he had a lot to share. But I thought perhaps I might be useful to him in terms of his deciding to share some moral injury if he had any, and that kind of thing didn't happen. But he did share some family disappointments with me, which he might not have shared with another counselor. I have no way of knowing. But that opportunity to be a moral injury counselor has not arisen for me, so I can't really speak to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do know from conversation that isolation in these locations can be very problematic and complicating. And I'm particularly affirming that your group is practicing this kind of visitation. And I remember that one of your members was doing that with the help of aides or nurses, even during COVID when he couldn't go in person.
That's right.
To provide an ongoing presence and an indication of connection, which I think is terrific.
Yeah.
Certainly for folks that some religious traditions, certainly Christian and Jewish, for example, there are particular prayers and rites that are also important to many persons toward the end of life, at the end of life. And I can see how one could also incorporate the pinning in relation to those.
Sure. But
it's helpful to know that this is, you don't just kind of go in and do this.
Right.
You've got an ongoing, you've got a way to discern that this would be helpful.
Right.
I'm going to.
Regarding rituals, Nancy and I have shared conversation about looking for a helpful interfaith ritual for transitioning out of the service. It's very much needed. But how to do that in a way that doesn't come across shallow and like a smorgasbord, take a little of this and a little of that and make it interfaith. That doesn't work.
Mhm.
So we experimented with a modified, there is Shellerine.
Yes, I go ahead, Tom, and then I'll turn to Shellerine.
With the help of a certified practitioner trained by the Pine Ridge Lakota Sioux Reservation, we conducted a modified sweat lodge ceremony a couple of years ago with 6 of our veterans. And it worked pretty well. I think we need to try it again. Next time it won't be in July. So go ahead, Shellerine, welcome back.
Perfect timing. Shellerine, please proceed.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry I had to run out. We got so much going on. Army Strong, right? Okay, so I am Reverend Dr. Shellerine Lang. I currently serve as the National Guard Bureau Installation Chaplain. I am a Delaware soldier. Proud to say I'm the first in the over 240-year history of Delaware to be a chaplain. And so breaking ceilings there. I am an itinerant elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and I am a hospice chaplain when I'm not in uniform. So my joy is to be a part of this group. I am a veteran. I deployed with the Delaware Army National Guard in 2019 to the Middle East. And so one of the things that interests me a lot is that when we think about a veteran, we think about moral injury, we think about all kinds of PTSD. We default to an older soldier who maybe was Vietnam, or the truth is we've got some veterans who are only 19 years old. We have some veterans who are 20 years old and still trying to discover who they are. And so for me, I find it the pendulum swing of who is a veteran and how do we help them, in the places where they find themselves. So one of the draws for me for this group is that I love interfaith ministry. That's what we do as chaplains, whether it's hospice, whether it's Army, we do interfaith ministry. And my life is eclectic. It's been a spiritual journey. When I was 8 years old, my father met this Black rabbi from Harlem, New York. So I was really raised in the synagogue. So while I was going to the synagogue, I was attending a Catholic school, talking about polar opposites of faith. And so for me to be able to serve in a capacity where you see God in a bigger way is very rewarding for me. And this group in particular, I just love because this is a place of acceptance. So I always talk about the difference between tolerance and acceptance. Tolerance says, this is my space and I'll decide what you do in my space. Acceptance says, this is our space and we will decide what happens in our space. So for this particular group, this is a shared space, and we find creative ways to find healing paths for different people. So when I'm not in uniform, I'm not doing hospice, I'm working on a doctor of education in traumatology. So moral injury is right in my wheelhouse. And it's like a silent, I would say it's like, if you had carbon dioxide seeping in your house and you didn't know it, moral injury could be like that because it's starting to eat away at some things you may not necessarily know that's exactly what it was or what it is. And I would imagine that moral injury has been around far longer than the terminology. And so I'm just honored to serve. I'm honored to be in this position. I'm just honored to continue to say yes to God. Because when you say yes to God, you never know where you wind up. So thank you for the opportunity to share. And I'll turn it back over to Tom.
Well, I guess I appeal to Nancy or Rita because I think we about spoke out. Right.
I want to, that's a fascinating metaphor that it's like carbon monoxide in a house, that you can't smell it, but it's making its inroads in your well-being. Sydney, one of the things that you might post is that you have a fan club now among the viewers, and they want to know where they can find your poetry. So if you could put that in the chat, that would be great. One of the things I wanted to ask you all was, some of you are likely in committed relationships. And I wonder if there are ways in which your group includes ways to support your partners if you're in a committed relationship, since they too can be quite affected by what you're dealing with from your military service.
I'll lead off. Next year will be Alice's and my 53rd wedding anniversary. And 3 years ago, I started power breathing. I received free training from the Welcome Home Troops Project. And I also learned that that training was free to spouses of veterans. So Alice had been aware of my growing enthusiasm about it. And I asked her, would she like to try it? And she said yes. So she took the training and she has been practicing daily for 2 years. And it's been helpful to each of us. And that's one very practical way that it affects the partner.
Thank you. Anybody else want to speak to that? Then I want to, sorry, yes, Jessica.
I was just going to say, my husband actually, my second husband, Don, whenever I say my husband, I mean Don, actually doesn't like Tai Chi at all, but he loves mindfulness. So we do that together. And thank goodness for that. I think it pretty much glues us together. It's stressful to have someone constantly caring for other people and not feel left out. I think I have great compassion for what he goes through.
Yeah. I think especially when we were involved in the conflicts in Middle East and in Afghanistan, some faith communities, at least it appears, failed to realize that there were spouses and children back home that were affected by their spouse's participation, and how important it would have been, and for some faith communities it was, to be in relation to them, to be in touch with them. Mm-hmm. So that's part of why I asked about, in addition to immediate family that are, moral injury doesn't just stick with the one person. As Shaloreen is describing it, it does its work. I wanted to. There's several times people have been asking about how local faith communities are coming together to support your programs, or how you, since several of you are also participating in local faith communities, or more than one, what ways has your experience reached out or begun to incorporate their sense of mission or participation?
I have actually done. I'm very strongly involved in Interfaith. I attend Juma every Friday, and the Islamic community has been incredibly helpful to me, because I take former offenders who happen to have been Muslim when they graduate and get out of prison, and I take them to their respective faith communities to get them involved there. The faith communities have also, the Sikh are not known for having people in prison. They're so peaceful that I've never met a Sikh in my 9 years and my over 160 students that have graduated from my program. Also true of the Jewish community. They're also very supportive. And these communities have been able to participate in a program I launched many years ago called the Prison Pen Pal program. So what these people are doing to help to grow in their faith is they are communicating with the needy offenders via pen pal letters, and it's also helping the inmates while in prison express their thoughts, concerns, and desires in letter form, which again gets back to Professor Jacobs' philosophy and mine about the importance of getting people to write things down. And again, because they're all men, it's helping these men deal with personal issues, feelings, things of that type. So I think that's been beneficial to me in my involvement with the various faith communities. And I'm very involved with the the Jewish faith community, because they've supported the refugees coming from Afghanistan, among other things. And these are refugees who have served our military or assisted our military. So that's been an important component in my journey.
Alice and I contacted a much younger Muslim couple from Turkey. They were active in interfaith work, and we asked them, would they like to be prayer partners with us? So two couples made a covenant to contact each other for common meals at restaurants or in our homes, and to go to events that were of educational value to both of us. They have since moved on to California because the young man had got his doctorate and Google hired him. So we missed them very much. But that's a really interesting model for interfaith education because it's not really academic, it's cultural and personal, and it requires very little organization. You just find somebody that's interested and do it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
One of the questions that comes up in the chat is that we've talked about, you all have talked about the value of your interfaith work and relationships, how you grow. I wonder if there's anything more you'd like to say about the ways in which your deepening engagement with someone whose faith tradition is other than your own and life-giving to them is proving useful to you. If it's maybe elaborated your own faith tradition or traditions for some of you.
I would say as a hospice chaplain, it allows me to see God in a bigger way. And one of the faith traditions that really touched me was I learned about Namaste. And just that peaceful place on the inside, just the divine in you, honoring the divine in somebody else. And there's no judgment. There's no tension. It's just really trying to find peace in the midst of differences and similarities. So I have integrated that into my life, along with being raised in a synagogue, along with going to Catholic school, along with being a part of the AME Church. There's just so much. It's just such a richness in honoring other people's chosen path to possibly the same location.
Mm-hmm.
I've had the privilege of bringing a number of very high-profile individuals in Delaware to both the Sikh community at the Gurdwara Sahib and also to the Juma at the Masjid Ibrahim Mosque, where I am good friends. I attend a weekly Juma service myself. Sheikh Abdul Hadi is the imam there. And I would encourage everyone, if you have not visited another faith community, then I would highly recommend you do it sooner than on your bucket list, because if you really believe in showing love to one another, the best way you can do it is to go visit these people, to learn about their particular worship practices on their turf, not in a coffee shop. And I'd be very happy to assist anyone who wishes to attend one of these other services, because the people that I know that are religious, we all believe that God is love and we must love one another. And there's no better way, in my opinion, to show love to other faith communities than to provide your physical presence there as a learning person, because it gives such pleasure and gratification and satisfaction to these other faith communities, especially the Islamic community here in Delaware.
I'd just like to add that when I was teaching at the University of Widener University, that particularly in my minorities in society class, we would have just people from different faiths, the whole bit. And actually we had students from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and places like that. And I'm still in contact with them actually. But they would all come to class and we would talk about religion and so on. And they would also send them out to, if they were from a different faith, they would go to a church in Chester, a different one, and we'd have them write a paper about it, you know. And then I would also invite them to my house, particularly we'd have the big Thanksgiving dinners. Maybe 120 people would show up, including my Muslims, some of my Muslim students. And they would just, it was like cultural diffusion, you know, like we just learn from each other. when it came to just, being a virgin, not being a virgin, being born again, the whole bit. So that's what we try to do. And that's what I think we've done. So.
I know that I really enjoy eating. So I've really enjoyed eating at all the different festivities of all the different faith traditions. So Kwanzaa, Passover, Seder, of course, all the Christian all the different holidays. I love celebrating. And you learn so much, I think, through food is a way that it's more than just feeding. It's like a real communion kind of thing of breaking bread with each other and sharing a little bit of the divine light. I think getting in touch with your own divine part of yourself, or at least for myself, allowed me to see the divine in others, and seeing others, their divine spark, allowed me to see my own even clearer, allowed it to grow and see it clearer, to where it wasn't as narrow and rigid. So one of the things that I had the pleasure of doing was going on a Franciscan pilgrimage for veterans, and using Francis of Assisi as sort of a guide, since he was a 12th century saint, as he ended up. But he was a military veteran, fought in a war, was a POW, suffered tremendous PTSD, what we would call it now, moral injury. All of that, had sort of a crisis of faith, and through that, really just completely changed his whole life and all of that, and then recruited a lot of his fellow buddies, army buddies, to join in like a new way of living, which was really inclusive to all faiths at that time as well. So, but being on a pilgrimage like that with other veterans who are, you walk this certain walk with God, with other veterans, and it's not about a particular faith. And I know some of the other veterans they've said that they didn't even believe in God. They kind of lost their faith completely. But it was just a way of really, I think, experiencing the divine and with each other in a different kind of way.
One of the things that I've learned from Quakers is the Clearness Committee, which used to be called Clearance Committee early in Quakerism. It's about testing a felt leading, divine leading. And you do that by asking the meeting to appoint 3 people whom you know well and whom you trust to be listeners about this leading that you have experienced. And they don't counsel you about it. They don't tell you what to do. They don't make judgments, but they just give you feedback of what they hear you saying. And it sounds very simple, but it's really quite profound in its helpfulness. And I've tried to teach other communities of faith about that process. I think it's very useful.
One of the things that I hope our audience and the groups that will view this webinar after it's posted might find from this conversation is ways to initiate a group. It may not be as diverse as yours is. This is kind of unique, I think. But I am aware that part of the trauma of moral injury certainly is the isolation, that there's so much camaraderie in the service. You come home and it's like cut off from this close bonding that you have to survive, especially in a combat context. And so part of what, really hasn't been spoken, but it's been a part of your conversation, is the depth of relationship that is formed among you, and which you clearly are able to facilitate, for example, in the prison ministry that you've been describing. So, one of my hopes is that what you've that as persons listen to your experience, your relationships, the way you've been able to talk about faith without it having to be ideological, my way or the highway kind of conversation. I think that my own sense, and you're welcome to respond to. I know you will respond to this, but part of my hope is that your experience might prompt some other groups, some other folks to explore forming a group like yours. If that were to happen, Tom, I hope that they might be able to reach out to you through our own resource, our own site. But I'm wondering if there, in the last few minutes, if there are particular things you would say to folks if they were pondering, how would I get this started where I live?
One of the most difficult problems is finding veterans, because a frequent behavior when you de-enlist is to not want to be a military person anymore, not to be identified as a veteran even. So that's a challenge, but keep your ears open, and if you learn of a veteran, pass that along to an organizer of your group, your prospective group, to gather people. And the way that we grew was just getting to know each other and doing research together and singly about post-traumatic stress and moral injury. We didn't know anything to do when we started out. We didn't understand why veterans were killing themselves or what were best practices or any of that. Everything we learned principally by reading on the internet and also talking with other veterans that we might be in contact with. So it's an evolution rather than a cerebral designing. Yeah.
Well, I doubt that it clearly has met needs some of you might not even have identified before you became a part of this and realized how enriching forms of difference you might not have encountered before, for example, in faith traditions, have been for your own life. But it clearly this has been life-giving.
Oh, absolutely.
To you all, and life expanding. And not only just in your group, but one of the things that's characteristic of veterans groups, as I've explored them, is service. That the kind of commitments that might have taken you into the military to be of service, then you carry with you, whether that's of service to folks in prison, to unhoused people, to survivors of violence. But this is a common denominator. It appears to me that another resource that perhaps the VOA and the Soul Repair Center might be able to help with is there doesn't seem to be a network. There doesn't seem to be any kind of directory, any way of knowing where are the other groups and how might we communicate with each other. Right. Maybe
Rita has an idea about that.
If anybody would, she will. But I do think that this could be something that would be valuable for folks to be able to get in touch with you, but also to share learning across the diversity of these veteran groups. It's clear from the comments posted in the chat that there's been a good deal of interest that you all have fostered in the group. And I see Rita, there may be something Rita wants to say before we sign off for today.
No, I was just going to say there are lots and lots of these sort of small efforts around the country. Mm-hmm. So there's Lisa Dunster's retreats for veterans and their families that she runs in Ohio.
Yeah.
There's the Syracuse University Moral Injury Project.
Right.
There's the thing that there was a film made about that Kent Drescher does in Napa Valley with a group of veterans there. Right. We have one that we have a program we're now trying to get restarted since COVID may finally go away enough to have in-person meetings, a program we call Resilient Strength Training that's peer veteran run. So there are these efforts going on, and I do think the awareness and getting your hands around the moral injury piece has been extremely helpful for all of the programs.
I think so too. And I think the ones you're describing, you come and then you might go. But part of what I'm interested in is if we could help folks identify these groups that are in a particular location and find depth and support with each other and clearly are serving their communities. If there were some way for them to know who each other is, that would be yet another
centralized directory or something.
The
difficulty is keeping it current, because some programs come and go. They operate for a while and then they run out of funding, or and then a new one starts somewhere. So I'm not sure how to you would wrangle all of that information, but I do think it would be, it's an obvious thing for the VA to do. To have a site at the VA that's just not VA programs, but extra ones that might be helpful to people, because not everybody is eligible to access the VA who's a veteran.
That's true.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that just to piggyback on that is that for a lot of veterans, this is the one common denominator, is that we, raise our hand and say that we would sacrifice our own lives for something bigger and what we believe in. And so for a lot of people getting out of the service to feel like they're broken or disconnected and things like that. But as far as getting veterans involved, when I go down to the Eastern Shore in Maryland, there's a lot of veterans there, but veterans know how to hide. What brings them out is service. Mm-hmm. So you say, hey, we're giving this fun family event where you get to serve and usually family stuff, like we're serving your kids and blah, blah, blah. Veterans will do almost anything to help another person out and another veteran out and their own family. They'll do things like that. So I think that is a unique part of our group too, is that we are real service based. Mm-hmm. And that's why that is the healing part, I think, of the moral injury.
Yeah. I think another good source of helping people to join these organizations, if you would reach out to the various National Guard units, I think you would be able to find a lot of people that would be able to give you the names and identities and contact information for people who would be good candidates for that. And I would say that, for me to conclude my comment, that the thing that has helped motivate me is something that a very prominent writer said one time. His name was Mark Twain. And Mark Twain said, let us endeavor to live such a life that when we die, even the undertaker will mourn our passing. With that kind of, I think, attitude, you could probably go a long way.
Yeah.
Well,
we've come to the end of this time. I see there one question. Tom, could you remind us, when did your group start?
2015.
2015.
And it was sometime after August of 2015. I think the fall of 2015.
Okay. I want to remind folks that are on the links with us that if you go to our website, I know this is not intuitive, but if you click on current webinars, if you go down to the bottom of that, you'll find the webinars from last year and the September and October webinars from this year. So we're getting a new website soon.
Could I have a little teeny commercial at the end here?
Go for it. Last minute.
We are having a national conference on moral injury, not only in veterans, but in 9 other populations, including healthcare, chaplains, journalists, social workers, etc., on January 11th at Washington National Cathedral. And it's open to the public. I'm going to post the link for the conference for everyone here in chat. You can find information. I think it will be really interesting to people who are concerned about moral injury in a much more broad way. It's been a gift of the veterans to us that the subject is now so useful in the wake of COVID for so many other people now who are experiencing moral injury. And the keynote speaker at the conference will be Rear Admiral Margaret Kibben, who is currently chaplain of the U.S. House of Representatives. And she's going to talk about her experience on January 6th.
Thank you, Rita.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, and especially thank you all who provided our program for today.
Thank you.
Really
Thank you for
appreciate
the
it.
opportunity.
All right.